Because my question always was, how much of this was actual paranormal, unexplained activity, and how much of this was like black access government projects? And we can get into that a little bit.
So explain to us a little bit about Indrid and what the heck are we dealing with here?
So yeah. So let's get into the basics. I've got my obviously I wrote the book on it. So I've got my book handy. I'm gonna read you guys something from the book here in just a moment. But basically what happened 10 days before the big Mothman sighting took place, right? The famous Scarberry Mallet sighting. There was a gentleman by the name of Woodrow Derenberger, just a regular average Joe. And he was driving home from his job. He was driving from Marietta, Ohio to Mineral Wells, West Virginia, right? They border each other. It's no big deal. So while he's driving home, he notices a very strange car that is riding his ass. And, of course, he's like, my God, this guy's rude. So he pulls over to let the car pass him. And then instead of the car passing him, it jumps up into the air and flies over his car, which cars didn't do in the 1960s. They still don't, unfortunately. And then whatever this thing was ended up looking like, the way he described it was very weird and unconventional. Usually we think of UFOs, we think of like the saucer, right? Or nowadays it's the Tic Tac, right? That's the hot new UFO out there, the sphere. This one looked like a kerosene lamp on its side. And that's the way he describes it. The way I like to describe it to people, because people also don't use kerosene lamps anymore, usually, it is a piece of candy rolled up in the wrapper, right? So two sides that are flared out, but a big bulky metal. So this craft, whatever it was, it lands in front of his vehicle, and before it's blocking the road, so he can't really get around it. So door opens up, and he's like, "Oh my God, it's gonna have tentacles, right? It'll have 50 eyeballs. What's it gonna be?" And out of the craft comes the scariest thing that you can think of. Some man comes out comes out of the craft. And I'm sorry, I can't take myself seriously. No, really, just some guy comes out. He looks to be roughly middle aged. He looks very Italian, actually, dark hair, kind of darker skin. Looks nice. He's in a nice suit. And he approaches Woody's vehicle. And while he's approaching the vehicle, he starts communicating with Woodrow telepathically. And he's like, "Hey, sir, I'd like to have a conversation with you. Could you roll your window down?" So I know what people are thinking, right? I'm now getting to the conversation. Asley, you totally skipped over the grinning man part. I want to read you guys exactly how Woodrow Derenberger described Indrid Cold the very first time he met him. This is what he said. He had a very pleasant appearance and was about 5 feet 10 or 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed approximately 180 to 185 pounds. His hair was very dark and thick, and it was combed straight back over his head. He seemed to have a very good and look normal in every way. Indra did not have a weird, creepy grin about him. He was just looked normal. But we'll get into the grinning man himself. So where that started, I think it was something that Keel was very well known for exaggerating a lot of the reports he got, and I think it was a Keel exaggeration. Keel was a writer, in his own right, and rightfully so. You read his books; they're very easy to read, very entertaining, and that's fine. But it's definitely morphed into something else. So this man approaches Woody's car, and he gets out. Woodrow gets out. He wasn't afraid of him. He was very unthreatening. And so they strike up a conversation. It lasts about 10 minutes. Indrid's just like, "Hey, what's that over there?" And Woody's like, "Oh, it's a city." And he's like, "Oh, we have that too, but we don't call it city. That's a weird word. We call it gathering because that's where we gather, duh." And Woody's like, "Oh, that makes sense." And, after they have a little conversation, Indrid looks at Woody. Hadn't introduced himself yet. I think he did introduce himself as Cold at that time. They call me Cold. And he said, I'll be back. He says that I'm going to come back. I want you to go. I want you to tell people about what you saw today. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show everybody me. I'm going to introduce myself. It's going to be a big party. So go tell the whole town about it. It'll be wonderful. So he does. He goes back home to his wife and 2 kids, and he is very visibly shook by what just happened. And he starts kind of telling his wife, and his wife is like, "Hold on." Yells at the kids, tell the kids to go to bed, and she's like, "Repeat exactly what you're saying." And he's telling her, I guess I met a man from space. I don't really know. He was driving this really weird car. It's kind of ugly. I don't know how I feel about it." And she's like, "Okay, well, hold on. So they call the police immediately. And the police show up, and of course they interview him, but the police don't show up by themselves. As a matter of fact, they showed up with an officer from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. The officer sits down with him and says, "Look, I believe you. We have record of these weird things in the sky. I just want to know what you saw. Tell us what you saw." And what he does, he tells them the whole thing. And again, it's pretty uneventful. It's not very long. But he does make contact with something that came from the sky. And, then they all kind of go about their business. Well, people then, and he started telling people whatever this thing was, said that it's coming back. So people then kind of ran with this. It made big news. It was all over the media at the time. And my God, people were so bored in the 1960s. This was really cool and interesting for them. So they started flocking to the Derenberger home. And as they're kind of camping outside of their house waiting for this guy to show up. And eventually, Woodrow starts having more telepathic communication with this gentleman. At that point in time, I think it was maybe their second or third conversation. He finally tells him, "My name is Indrid Cold." And he's like, "Listen, people are starting to think I'm nuts. Are you coming back here?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course. Just chill, bro. It's happening." And so one day, Woodrow comes home from work. His house is, of course, flooded with tons of people, because it always was at that point in time. Everybody's there to see the man from space. But he goes into the home. His wife's like, "Come in here, come," giving him the eye, but being very discreet. And she leads him to the back of the house. And guess who's there? Our buddy, Indrid Cold. He's not just there by himself. At that point, he's there with a second gentleman that he introduces as Demo Hassan. So Indrid brought a buddy, and they all sat in the back of the house and hung out for a long time, just chit-chatting about their own lives, about their human lives, about their not really human lives. And things just kind of escalate from there. I mean, that's the initial meeting. But Woodrow Derenberger goes on to, curate a lifelong friendship with this man and with all of the other space people. And what I mean by that, when I say that, Woodrow started taking trips to Indrid's planet. Indrid comes from a planet called Lanulos. He is Lanulosian, okay? And it's very much like our planet, except way more advanced. These people, they live about twice the amount of time that we did. So they live to be about 200 years old, whereas we're like 80s, 90s is really pushing it now. But they're very normal, but they'll have kind of alternative ways of doing things. They have, baby policies where you can only have so many children. But they have a very low divorce rate because everybody can read each other's mind all the time. So they don't really have a lot of disagreements because anything can really just be solved by communicating properly. They walk around naked because it's not a big deal to them. There's just a lot of very euphoric things about Lanulos, but it's not just Lanulos. Dima Hassan, I believe he was from a different planet. I think he was allegedly from Saturn or Jupiter or one of those. There's tons of other people involved here. So Indrid would show up and he would have a buddy with him. Sometimes they're women, sometimes they're men. Sometimes it's his kids.
As soon as I had stopped, there was a door opened in the side of this vehicle, and this man stepped out and came directly to me, or came to the truck. He walked to the right-hand side of the truck, and he told me to roll down the window. He asked me to roll down the window on my right-hand side of my truck. And I had done what he asked. And this man stood there, and he first asked me what I was called. And I knew he meant my name, and I told him my name. And he asked me, he said, why are you frightened? He said, don't be frightened, we wish you no harm. He said, we mean you no harm, we wish you only happiness. And I told him my name, and when I told him my name, he said he was called Cold. That was the name that he was called by. And he asked me what the city of Parkersburg, he pointed to the lights, he didn't point, but he gave the impression that he was pointing, and he asked me what that was called. And I told him it was Parkersburg, it was a city, a town. And he asked me if most all the people lived in this city or town. And I explained to him that it was a place of business. It's where we transacted our business. That the people lived in communities, outlying communities, most of the people. And when I told him that this was a city, he said that where his home was, that was called a gathering.
From. So, we have a tactical commander who's actually in charge in the field, and then we have an operational commander who's in charge of the whole expedition for the entire week or 3 days or however long it is. So our tactical commander goes out comes up with a plan of operation, with a concept of operation. And what we decided that evening is we were going to have multiple teams set around the periphery of the meadow, equipped with a thermal and night vision. Mm-hmm. And we were going to have a single member, Bob in this case. And, Bob was just like a friggin', weird magnet. And so what he was going to do is walk across the top of the ridge solo and see if he could drive anything down to us, and also see if he could observe anything. Now, the foliage was very heavy in July, so the odds of him observing something were pretty remote. But, we had a good vantage point down there in the bottom between this ridge and the large creek. So we got set up. Bob came on the radio, said, hey, I forgot something back at base camp. I need to go back and get it. And so, the tactical commander said, that's fine. We're just going to stay on station here, go back, get what you need to do. Let us know when you get to the bottom of the trail and start going up the ridge. So we're patiently waiting. And then Bob comes over the radio and he goes, hey guys, I'm at the tree across the trail, which is a really well-known landmark for all the people that research this area. And he says, I don't know how I got here. So it's like, okay, first thing I did is our medic, contacted me and said, I think this is medical. So he got on the radio and he said, okay, Bob, how do you feel? Yeah, I feel fine. I just don't remember getting to this landmark. I don't remember the 15-minute walk from base camp to here. And he says, okay, do you have a headache? No, because we're thinking maybe a stroke or something. Okay, did you fall? No. Okay, is your vision, messed up? No, my vision's fine. Repeat Mary Had a Little Lamb to make sure that he, his words weren't slurred. Can you grimace? Do you have, bilateral muscle function on both sides of the face? Yes. So, we all walk around with a thing called a normalcy box. And what we do is when we encounter something weird, we quickly reach into our normal box and we pull out something that kind of fits. And we said, that's what it is, because we get comfort at that. That's how human beings work. And so we reached into our comfort box and said, okay, Bob must have just been so focused on the mission, in our outing here, that he just forgot. Like sometimes you drive up to work and you're like, okay, I don't remember the drive here. So we panned it off as normal. So they see Bob come down off the ridge. They're watching his headlamps. They bring their thermals up and they see his heat signature. Okay, they can tell it's him, hot against the surrounding ambient temperature. So they drop their night vision, or not drop their thermal, and about the time they do that, where he was standing, they see an orb of light, a sphere of plasma. And this sphere moved about 150, 200 meters and then winked out. And the distance and the speed it moved, we calculated at about 23 to 26 miles per hour. It was really moving, faster than a human being can move. They quickly brought their thermal back up and are scanning, and they see a man-shaped heat signature where the light went out, where the sphere of light blinked out. They quickly get on their radio and they say, "Bob, are you okay?" And they're watching the heat signature through their thermal, and they see the heat signature bring a radio up to its mouth, key it, and at that time they hear Bob's voice say, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" And they stopped. And they thought for a while. They said, "Bob, you need to come over to us." So Bob makes his way over to these two gentlemen. They say, "Bob, how do you feel?" "I'm fine." "Why?" "Why? We saw you turn into a ball of light and fly across the meadow." And he says, "No, I didn't. I just walked over here." They said, "No, you had to experience something. What was it like? I mean, you were moving." So he goes, "No, I walked over here because I'm too old to run. I'm not running anywhere, especially over this terrain." And they got into an argument. So when you boil it down, and I remember, right after that happened, getting into arguments with people. But what actually happened is you had two realities existing in the same space at the same time, kind of like the dual slit experiment in quantum theory, where you'll have light acts as a particle and as a wave, but both at the same time until the observer affects the state of matter. So
this one right here is the one that I'm referring to. So this is a new area that I've been scoping out and checking out, and I've still got to go back through my back trail camera footage, but I've been scrummaging around through the pictures that I had taken, and I've got a couple things in there. I've sent some of the stuff to Daniel because some of that stuff is kind of odd, and and I want to get another opinion on some of this stuff, and get another pair of eyes, because some people can see what others can't. I'm looking for more visible stuff like what I got behind me here. I'm looking for the stuff that I can see, and tell. I don't really dig too deep into my photographs. I just look for what's obvious. And as you can see, these laurel branches are all twisted over and bent. And you can see right here, that's a big opening that goes in. Now, I got in there and I laid down and I had plenty of room to move around. So, I mean, clearly something very, very large has been going into that location and using it for a shelter. I mean, what's even more convenient is right on the back side of it there's a creek that runs through there. So, I mean, there's water and they got shelter, and I mean, obviously there's going to be food, but I mean, they eat bark and stuff like that, meat, because they're omnivorous. So it's an excellent source of cover for them to hide in these mountain laurels.
That calf had been cauterized, blood drained, organs removed. And that's really where I started. I mean, just trying to look at all these different locations and, and getting to know people even in the United Kingdom. So this is global. This is not just a United States phenomena. And Trey Hudson, who's a great friend of mine, and I've been out on investigations there at the Meadows with him and his team twice. Both times we've experienced very, very unexplained things going on. Some things are common to the Rocky Mountain Ranch and Skinwalker Ranch and other locations, and some things are not. One of the weirdest things that we both have in common, but also different, if that makes any sense, are these strange boxes that we're seeing. Strange sounds, orbs, paranormal things for sure in both locations. That seems to be, and all the locations has this paranormal element, a little bit of the cryptids. One thing that the Meadows didn't have, were the Rocky Mountain Ranch, or it was known as Clearview Ranch back in the day. Then I was like, okay, I'm just going to disclose where the location is. It's in Elbert County in Colorado. But they didn't have the mutilations out there in the Meadows project. So that's one thing that's a bit different. But I love the work that Trey and his team are doing. Trey just came out with another great book, and he actually breaks it down on a graph in his new book. What are commonalities as far as the strange sounds and things like that from some of the well-known hotspots for high strangeness. One of the very first things I did is I took, and I would say 90% of them fall into this category of being highly magnetic area. So I went to the U.S. Geological Magnetic Map, and I looked at places like Sedona. Sedona is like, so when a location is highly magnetized, it's a really light shade of pink. So you have Sedona, Arizona, Marley Woods, highly, Skinwalker Ranch, Blind Frog Ranch, the Elbert County, Clearview, Rocky Mountain Ranch of Colorado, and even in the UK, highly magnetic. San Luis Valley, where the Snippy the Horse event took place, it's highly magnetic in a really concentrated area, so it's really anomalous magnetically. But also, David Pilates in his Missing 401, the UFO Connection, he talks about aquifers. And there was an interesting case out of Medicine Bow, Wyoming in 1974 that involved a box and, an alien and all these kind of high strangeness things also. And it's highly magnetic as well. So there's something to that. And even within the paranormal world, you hear about, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. You have highly magnetized area. You have these waters or aquifers underground. So right where this ranch sits. And also it's important to understand the ranch itself of Rocky Mountain Ranch is 60 acres. But the phenomenon was really affecting all of Elbert County. So it wasn't just located on the ranch itself, very much like, Skinwalker Ranch. It's the whole all that area right there, the Mesa, Archuleta Mesa and Dulce as well. It's very active. So it's not just kind of centrally located. It's this whole area. And so we have certain geological aspects too of crystals and granite and things like that. So you put all these three things together, plus then you add the folklore of the areas, and you hear that with the, it's the Ute tribes and the Cheyenne, the Comanche and all that. So you take in all these four elements, and I think it creates something that either allows us to interact with the phenomena or see it more easily than maybe other locations, or it's attracting the phenomena to be there. Like Mount Shasta and things they're doing beyond Skinwalker Ranch too. They're looking at, the rocks and the magnetism and the water. And I think they're right. I think they're on course for that. And one of the very first things the adults reported out there when they bought the ranch were like bangs and sounds and hums, very similar to the Taos hum. And they could never identify where these sounds were coming from. And that's where my mind went first, where, are they digging underground? Obviously, we have tunnels all through the United States, and Colorado is particularly interesting because we have here in Colorado Springs, I'm right behind Pikes Peak right now. I'm up in the mountains behind Pikes Peak. We have NORAD and the Air Force Academy and Fort Carson. And in getting the briefing document, and that's why I said we know there was a military presence out there in the 70s. That were aware of what was happening at Rocky Mountain Ranch, so much so there was a whole study done right here. It's called The Choppers and the Choppers. And that was another phenomenon happening where all these marked out, this military presence of all these blacked out coppers, and were they related to the animal mutilation deaths and things like that. So there's no question that there was a military presence out there on the property. And underground tunneling is something I've thought a lot about, even with the Snippy the Horse case and Mount Blanca and the Dulce base. Are they tunneling from military installations out? Now, at the time, it was Stapleton Airport, but I do believe, perhaps already DIA was in the works, and there's a lot of mysteries around the Denver International Airport too. So that is a strong possibility.
Right. It is no coincidence that you've already mentioned two of the three areas that I pinpoint in conversation frequently, which is Sedona and Mount Shasta.
Yeah.
There is what I call the vortex triangle, which includes Mount Shasta, Sedona, and Asheville, North Carolina.
Interesting.
All three areas are very intense vortex areas.
It was called the Mars team, and we took
Mhm.
all the cases, which was like over 10,000 before their case management system went online. So these are all the old paper files, and we redacted all the personal information so we can get them out to the public. I think it's important to share research and data. And in that, I came across a case called the Ohio Pile creature case, and it checked all the boxes. And this is in Ohio Pile, Pennsylvania. Police were called, cryptids, orbs, UFO sightings, all of it, the strange noises, and it was really intriguing. So I checked the magnetism of Ohio Pile. It too is highly magnetic and checks all the boxes. So they're scattered all over the place, and of course I'm going crazy. I'm putting pins in Google Maps and trying to triangulate and all that kind of good stuff, and yeah, there's certainly something to all this, and I do think it's some sort of interdimensional portal activity. And why I say that is that very first time on Beyond Skinwalker season 1, that was my first time back on the ranch since I was a kid. And I'm out with the team, and I knew there was going to be snow, but this was like heavy blizzard, like crazy. I was not prepared. And I was walking the team back to where I had this daytime box encounter when I was younger. And what's interesting is it never made the episode. They haven't even touched on the boxes. I think it's just kind of maybe too out there or strange or whatever. So that didn't even make the episode. But why we're walking back to the tree line behind the ranch house, it was like, it was snowing so hard that our footprints were getting covered up really fast. But here, right in front of me in the blanket of snow, were these bipedal tracks in the snow, pretty wide stride. Then what was strange is they disappeared and reappeared and then disappeared. So to me, it felt like something was curious, like all these decades are going by. Nobody is ever back here at night. And all of a sudden you have a film crew with flashlights and headlamps, and like something was curious as to why we were there. That's what it felt like, and came up and walked. And I don't know, it felt like something was underground. And what's interesting, right there at the ranch, 2 major aquifers come together. So you have the Denver and the Dawson, which means there's different water tables underground, which could open up, begs the questions, are there caverns under there? Or voids where something could be tunneling or living or coming in and out of. I don't know. It's just a theory I have. Who knows?
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked, you mentioned Snippy a couple of times on here, and Snippy even came up in a conversation last week on the form of the forbidden.
And in that, I came across a case called the Ohio Pile creature case. And it checked all the boxes. And this is in Ohio Pile, Pennsylvania. Police were called, cryptids, orbs, UFO sightings, all of it, the strange noises. And it was really intriguing. So I checked the magnetism of Ohio Pile. It too is highly magnetic and checks all the boxes. So they're scattered all over the place. And of course, I'm going crazy. I'm putting pins in Google Maps and trying to triangulate and all that kind of good stuff, and yeah, there's certainly something to all this. And I do think it's some sort of interdimensional portal activity. And why I say that is that very first time on Beyond Skinwalker season 1, that was my first time back on the ranch since I was a kid. And I'm out with the team, and I knew there was going to be snow, but this was like heavy blizzard, like crazy. I was not prepared. And I was walking the team back to where I had this daytime box encounter when I was younger. And what's interesting is it never made the episode. They haven't even touched on the boxes. I think it's just kind of maybe too out there or strange or whatever. So that didn't even make the episode. But why we're walking back to the tree line behind the ranch house, it was like, it was snowing so hard that our footprints were getting covered up really fast. But here, right in front of me in the blanket of snow, were these bipedal tracks in the snow, pretty wide stride. Then what was strange is they disappeared and reappeared and then disappeared. So to me, it felt like something was curious, like all these decades are going by. Nobody is ever back here at night. And all of a sudden you have a film crew with flashlights and headlamps, and like something was curious as to why we were there. That's what it felt like. Well, the APRO files went missing for over 37 years. Nobody had access to them. And a whole wall of the National Historical UFO Record Center, which anybody can go to their website and visit there. And they have original Project Blue Book, APRO, CUFOS, NICAP. It would take you 5 years to just go through and just touch the surface on what David has acquired there. It's an amazing place. So long story short, I go to visit the archives right after they moved it to their new location. And I'm there to selfishly try to get more stuff, all the original APRO stuff from the ranch. And Dave plops down all the snippy stuff. And there's photos that have never been seen, recordings from the Nellie and Burl and the police and sheriffs, and the Condon committee looked at this case. This is a huge case. But what I didn't know there was all these commonalities to what was going on in Rocky Mountain Ranch, in the San Luis Valley, in the Snippy the Horse case, from hums to boxes to cryptids to evidence on the ground, to this strange tool Nellie found in the broken Chico brush, which was very similar to the Lonnie Zamora case, out there in Socorro, New Mexico, to this green ooze, to, on and on and on. And every day for 6 months, my mind was going, holy, you're kidding me. So yeah, it's an important case. And the original photos that were in that file, which included never seen before photos of Mother Lady and Snippy, the 3-year-old colt. So there was a big controversy. For some reason that we can't understand, Burl Lewis, who was one of the horse owners, decided to change the sex and the name of the horse from Lady to Snippy. And it was this big kind of messy thing. But we now have photos, and one in particular that really is, there was a whole series, there's like 4 or 5 of them, where they show Lady, another horse, Sheba, after Snippy's mutilation. And those 2 horses got really skittish after what happened to Snippy. So there was original maps and drawings and all sorts of information that was never known before about this case. So it's really important to get all that new information that was lost to time out there for people to really take a second look at.
Is this what we're talking about with Snippy?
Yeah. So this was one of Snippy's first pictures. So he's still a little bloated, but you can see he's a 3-year-old Appaloosa. You see the Appaloosa markings on him. You can see his back left leg is broken, as if dropped from above. So he had cauterization basically from the shoulders. Obviously the skin and flesh was removed. Brain cavity was empty, stomach was empty, powder was found there. But what's really fascinating about this too is it was rainy when Snippy went missing. So you could see tracks of like animals and birds. So at the time, originally there were 4 horses pastured on the King Ranch. Smoky, a black, Sheba, Lady the mother, which was a dapple gray, and then 3-year-old Snippy. And Smoky had died the week before the black horse, what they thought from a rattlesnake bite, but it bit it on the back of the hip, and he was 14 hands high and a 1,200-pound horse. A rattlesnake in the hip wouldn't have killed Smoky. So we had a mysterious horse death the week before Snippy. So that left the 3 horses, Lady, Sheba, and Snippy. So in that file, I sent it to you. There's a map where you could see the horses were like corralled in a zigzag. Do you have that image there? And so because the ground was moist, they could see the tracks of the horse very clearly. So it's as if a light or an orb or something were corralling and spooking the horses in this zigzag pattern. Then you see Snippy milling in a circle like this. Okay. And the other 2 horses, Sheba and Lady, run back to the ranch house. Snippy is then picked up by something. I don't know what. There's no tracks and is dropped from above where he lay. So here, this was a map that they drew right after. Oh, that's another thing. It had sheared off fence posts. So much evidence in this case. So you can kind of see poor Snippy laying there. And then you have these, they put on the map where the Chico brushes were squashed down, where the tool was found, where the horse was milling in a circle right here. It says milling I wish I had a pointer, but this, and then he was dropped. What's also interesting in these photographs, his back, it would be his back left leg was also stripped of the flesh and the fur, like the head and the neck, which wasn't really reported upon, but you can clearly see it in some of the photographs. So just so much evidence around this case.
Right.
And
I'm
see,
not.
I sent a close-up picture of his back leg, and they even drew at the time where you could see his back right leg was broken, as if dropped from above. And there were no track marks. This was muddy. You could see even a bird track. There were no footprints, horse tracks, nothing. So, it's super mysterious. What could have done this to the horse? And a chapter of the book really goes into some of the theories that were given. At first, the sheriff Lightning Ben, there you could see how they drew it. So the leg looks clearly broken from above, and you could see the Appaloosa spots on there as well. But Ben King thought it was lightning. Clearly, we can rule out lightning. There's been other animals struck by lightning. There was no evidence of lightning around. And another weird theory was this tripod that they said people built this tripod and brought in a big, vat of acid and then hung poor Snippy up and dunked his head. And I mean, just like if that were the case, we would have footprints and track prints and all sorts of things left behind. That's just silly. But the funniest one to me, and there was even a newspaper article about this, that they were radioactive ants that did this to Snippy. And the thing is,
Okay.
even before this, all through the valley in 1966, and even prior to that, there's tons of orb sightings, UFO sightings, strange hums like the Taos hum. I mean, it's just the whole valley. That's why there's books written about the mysterious valley, cryptids, and on and on. So, those theories were just kind of, you got to look at it and just shake your head and go, oh boy.
A photo of Snippy before this whole encounter here.
That's the best photo, because when we first found that, Dave Marler and me and Tony, it was just like, oh my gosh, here it is, the never seen photo of poor Snippy as a 3-year-old colt. And what's wonderful about this too, like today we all take thousands of phones or pictures on our cell phones, and so we don't typically go and get them developed very often. But these, they're all like marked on the back, or they had the commentary or written. So it was really neat that they did this. And it said 3-year-old Snippy, or this was 1-month-old Snippy with Mother Lady. So that's his Mother Lady right there. However, even with Snippy, the blood was drained from this animal. And what really was kind of interesting to me, oftentimes, we hear things, decades through the years of, commonalities for true animal mutilations that are mysterious. And one of them is that other animals will not approach to eat on them, right? And that was reported even in the Snippy case. And even on that map that you showed earlier, you could see where coyote droppings were around the horse, and you could see animals almost approaching, like here, these little, I can't point to it, but those little arrows with the little droppings, those were but they never approached Snippy. They didn't eat on Snippy. They stayed away. And later in the documents, it stated that eventually when the coyotes did try to eat on them, they died of dysentery. There was also high radiation readings around Snippy, but the closer you got to the horse himself, the radiation readings went down. Another thing that was reported, I found fascinating, was something we hear about in these strange locations, which is the cone of silence. One of the strangest animal mutilation cases that I did an interview with a woman that grew up in Elbert County and, right by the Rocky Mountain Ranch, her whole family, generational out there. And so she drove to Wyoming to interview about all the cattle they lost back in the day. And right out of high school, so this would have been, late 70s, early 80s, her and her husband moved to Rama, Colorado, which is just right outside of Elbert County. It's right there, right by all the high strangeness and the Black Forest and all that. And her husband was out on horseback checking the cows for calves. She said he came across a dead calf. But what's interesting about this, and what blew my mind too, she has the original photos that she sent me of this. So He approaches a calf like, what happened to you? 4 incisions, 1, 2, 3, 4, in a perfect square. The top of the fur was removed, but the skin was still there. So he gets on the horse, goes back to the ranch and gets my witness. They come back in the pickup truck. She said that took 20, 25 minutes to come back. That calf had been cauterized, blood drained, organs removed. And she sent me pictures of what a calf looks like. I mean, they're graphic, but when a coyote jumps on it and just tears at it, she said this was miles off the county road. They didn't hear anything. There were no tracks other than what the horse had left earlier. So no footprints, no nothing. They said they felt watched. It was eerie. It could not explain it. It terrified them. That just blew my mind. It's like he came upon this calf during a mutilation, which is really interesting because it was 4 cuts, boom, boom. I don't know if they were lasered, boom, 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 and they were just getting ready and were able to just vanish and then come back and finish the job. But that case really blew my mind.
I've waited for so long to see when you come back to me. Through the wars and battles that were lost, we're born again, it's you and me. The rest is history. Past lives. Past lives. Did we dance together on different floors in 1500 or 1504? We must have been lovers. We must have been something in our past.